Hi guys and welcome. In this video it's going to be something of a mechanical one. It's been a while since I've done anything of that nature, but necessity has brought this one around because I'm having to replace the calipers on my car for its annual inspection, as all of the UK viewers will be aware that we have to endure. So having discovered that the original equipment parts, brand new, are horrendously expensive for Perodua Kenari owners of any other Perodua that use the same calipers, I was quoted, I think off the top of my head, it was £437 per caliper. I'm assuming that would be plus VAT, and that was from a dealer. Ludicrously expensive. It's quite feasible that these calipers are used on other cars. I would love to know what if they are, because that could be a useful source of information for finding them. The sliding pins, which I will mention in a little while when we get to them, are the same size, thread, pitch, length, etc. as I think it's the Mitsubishi Outlander, and I know this because the calipers that were on when I went to change the brake pads, I had a real pig of a job undoing these bolts, which seize up and get very stiff, and then the sliding pins actually seize into here as well as the threads in here. And I ended up having to get that down to the garage so they could get the heat gun torch on that and some heavy duty gear to get those bolts off and swap the pads. So because I chewed up one of the bolt heads quite badly in the process of trying to remove it, I went to try and source some alternatives and found via a Malaysian forum that these pins are the same as the Mitsubishi Outlander. Or was it a Malaysian forum? It might have actually been an English website. I forget off the top of my head. So that's a useful one to know, and I will double check that and put that in the comments below. So anyway, looking around, I found breakers that used to deal with Perodua as well, and I ordered a left caliper, which is this one here, and then found out that it actually failed on both calipers binding, and it's the piston, not the sliding pins, unfortunately. So it means a complete strip. You cannot buy a reseal kit, an OEM reseal kit. And because you can't buy these calipers aftermarket, there are no aftermarket manufacturers that make these specific calipers in the UK. Having checked several brake suppliers, because you can't buy them aftermarket, you can't buy an aftermarket reseal kit, and the OEM suppliers won't give you a reseal kit because it's a point of failure if it's incorrectly fitted. I've already stripped down the left caliper, and I'm going to now, sorry, the right hand caliper, and I'm now going to strip down the left hand caliper and go through the procedure. And the reason for this is just to give it all a thorough clean and check everything and make sure that the bits and pieces in it are of a usable nature before I go ahead and swap them out for the ones on the car. I'm also waiting for some brake fluid coming as well. So enough of the waffle. What we're going to do now is go ahead with a procedure to separate them. Now, the calipers were supplied to me like this, with the mounting plate still attached. This will actually just pull straight off. If I were to pull that straight off, it'll pull the rubber boots off and just slide straight off the pins. If you were taking it off the car, what you would do, if you were actually removing it from the car yourself, what I would recommend you do is loosen off the bleed nipple, which is a 10mm hex socket, and I would recommend that you use an actual hex fitting, a 6-sided one, so that you get a good grip on it, as they can be quite stiff. Get a wire brush, a small wire brush like this, go around the threads as much as you can, give it a good soak with WD or plus gas or diesel or whatever, paraffin, whatever your penetrating oil of choice is, and then loosen that to make sure it's loose. Loosen off the bolt securing the banjo, the brake line banjo, while it's mounted and solid and not going anywhere, and then undo these two bolts, push the piston back, lift this away, at which point you can remove the brake pads. And then if you want to remove this, you can go ahead and undo the bolts. I think these are 17mm bolts in this mounting plate. These will be very tight, and I believe that they are held in with thread lock as well, so they will take a bit of shifting. But you've got the caliper off like so, and you want to give it a good check over and a good clean. Now what I'm going to do is degrease it using WD-40, which really is really good for getting the worst of the gunk off, and using something like an old toothbrush like this one, it's ideal, and you can really shift some of the gunk. But before we soak everything in WD-40, you need to take it to pieces and take off all the rubber components, especially just in case the WD-40 doesn't like the rubber. Now, it's not too harsh a chemical, but typically anything that's flammable or is petroleum based shouldn't touch rubber, because it will dry it out and it will start to perish. And when it's to do with brakes, you really don't want that. Even on these, which are just dust boots, these stop rubbish getting onto the sliding portion and stopping them sticking. Even on these, you don't want to wear them out. So the first thing to do, if you've got it like this and you've not had a chance to loosen these bolts off, clamp this in something like a vise or a workmate, which is what I used. You will need a 14mm socket, again a 6-sided one. This is where I messed up initially, trying to use a ring spanner. Something that fits very solidly like that, with little to no give at all. And then after you've given this a good clean around, you pull the rubber boot back, giving it a good clean around, soaked it in penetrating fluid and left it soak for a little while. Apply this and then sharp taps with a hammer until you feel it free off. And if it doesn't, then you can soak it and leave it soak some more, or you can apply some heat, soak it again, and then try again, and it will eventually give. And if it's very severe and corroded into these sliding portions, it will probably need much more severe heat from a blowtorch, from an oxyacetylene type torch. As you can see, I've already loosened these just to save all the sort of aggravation of showing you that, but it does take a bit of brute force. I've already loosened the bleed nipple, and so I'm going to take off the bleed nipple. Put that to one side. We're going to unscrew these and pull them out completely. The upper one of the two, which is denoted by the placement of the bleed nipple, the calipers are the same apart from the placement of the bleed nipple. So the right hand one will have the bleed nipple here, the left hand one here. So unscrewing this and pulling it out, you'll see there we've got a straight pin on this one with, let me just get a rag to wipe that with, which has got some lithium grease on, which is not the right stuff, but it's better than copper grease. Copper grease, you do not want to use copper grease on these, apart from on the threads. Copper grease is an anti-seize compound. It dries up and it will eventually allow this to corrode and seize in here. You do not want to use copper grease on the sliding portion. The moly grease, sorry, not lithium grease, moly grease is better, but it's still not the right stuff. What you actually need is silicone grease, which is water-based, friendly to rubber, your little rubber boots here, and won't degrade or damage them, which is another problem. And you can use a little bit of moly grease or copper grease on the threads to make removal easier next time around, because this one, the bottom one of the two, being closer to the road, is the one that catches all the crap, and this is the one that will get gunked up and end up solid in there. This upper one that I'm just going to remove right now is the one with the rubber bung on the end, and it's a little rubber sleeve, and as I say, I can only assume the reason behind this is as a damper. It will come off, and you want to wiggle that off, which, if I get my little pick, you'll need a right angled pick incidentally for this. So, and you can hook that right through there and just hook it straight off, as you can see. Give that a good clean and make sure it's clean inside as well, and pop that aside. And you can check this for any wear, corrosion, pitting or what have you. If it's got a little bit of pitting in, a little bit of corrosion, there's a very mild amount there, but it's you can't feel it. It's nothing bad enough to worry about on this particular one. The one that I took off originally though had some bad pitting. Just take some fine wet and dry, 600 or 1200 grit wet and dry, and then just give it a good sort of cleaning up with that. Wipe it down, make sure there's no bits of grit or what have you left, and then it's ready to go again. As long as the surface is smooth and you can't feel any pits or bumps where it's likely to snag and cause a problem. With those removed, your mounting plate comes free, and you can pop off these dust seal rubbers, which are little concertina rubbers, and then give these a clean. Just run your rag or some tissue through there, stretch it out, and just rub that clean until it gets rid of all of the grease that's inside there, especially if it's anything like regular grease, moly grease, copper grease or what have you, because you actually want silicone grease on those, because any other grease can wear it. These little retaining anti-rattle springs you can ping out with a screwdriver. I'm just going to leave them in for the time being until we get to the cleaning up portion, because now that the rubber parts are away from this, we can soak this in WD and give it a good seeing to with the toothbrush. Onto the caliper itself, you'll see that the piston is pushed out quite a way there. I'm just going to push it back in a little way, and you need to make sure that it will move under hand pressure, which this one did the other day, and it's going to make a liar of me now. Oh, there we go. It's a little bit tight. So you need to push that back in just a little. I'm just going to mop up that bit of brake fluid that's come out there. And the first thing we need to do is remove the dust seal rubber, which concertinas out. So pull that out of the lip of the piston and pull it forward like so. And then inside here, this is going to be impossible to actually show on the camera, but inside here is a metal snap ring. And the snap ring holds this in place and butts it up to the back of the mounting plate. Now hopefully, there we go. Now hopefully you can see that. Just using the pick inserted at a bit of an angle so you make sure that you don't damage the seal, which I just did a little bit there because I'm a bit of a klutz and trying to watch the camera and make sure I'm in focus at the same time. You can see that's come out there. What you can do when you've got one end out is wiggle that out and around, and that spring clip comes out. Pop that down there, and then this will just pull straight out, as you can see, like so. This has also got some grease on. Some standard grease, which it shouldn't have. Again, silicone grease is what you should be using on brake components that are in contact with rubber. But we can clean all that down, and then the only other seal left is inside the carburetor body, the caliper body. So what you need to do now is taking something good and sturdy, like a long screwdriver, which I have right here. Bearing in mind this piston is solid steel, you're not going to do any damage to it. Supporting it with your fingers, making sure this is as straight as possible. Push down until the piston comes out. Hopefully that's still on the camera. And it will suddenly just pop out, so mind your fingers when it does that. What you can do also as an alternative is put something like a rag there, so that you're not going to maim yourself by pushing it onto your fingers. It is very, very stiff on this latter part, because this is not typically There we go. That's not typically as far as the piston will travel in normal use. So that's the piston out. That needs a good clean up, and what we need to do is check this entire surface of the piston. It doesn't matter from that groove that way, because this is the exposed bit. This doesn't travel inside the caliper body, so that's not so important. The important bit is this whole body here, because this is the bit that slides in and out of the piston. This needs to be smooth with no corrosion, no pitting and no mess. It has got a little bit of, I don't know if that's corrosion or if that's just a bit of dried on grease, so I will need to clean that up with a bit of solvent, some thinners or something similar, and see what that looks like. I think it might just be dried on grease actually, that. But that'll need a good clean up anyway. And you just need to make sure it is actually a little bit of corrosion looking at that there. So a little bit of dressing up with some very fine wet and dry and a good clean up, and before that's reassembled. Expect corrosion inside there. That's quite normal. It's a good thick solid lump of metal, so unless it's really, really bad corrosion, you're not going through there. Nothing to worry about. What we now have to do, we'll have some brake fluid in there, so this is why I'm doing this in a tub. So as you can see, what we'll now do is, you can see the seal, which is this black one here, using the pick and putting it in at such an angle that you can get right down to the bottom of the groove but not dig into the rubber, so you're going away from the rubber, but not too hard, and don't try and force it, because this is steel on steel. You can scratch this and you don't want to do that. And then wiggle it around until it goes under the seal, and you can just hook it out like so. And then that is your seal removed. At this point you can see down here there's quite a bit of corrosion in this lower recess part. This is where the dust boot goes, and that will need a little bit of clean up before it goes back in. And you can see that this is just a flat face that metal clip holds it to. So that's it for the stripping portion of the caliper. That's it stripped completely. And while this procedure is specifically for the Perodua Kenari single piston sliding caliper, the general procedure applies to pretty much any sliding caliper setup, or even to a degree an opposed piston setup. The only times things get a little bit trickier are when you have opposed piston setups and you need compressed air to force the pistons out because they're really stuck in there. Sometimes they're so badly stuck that you need to get some kind of extractor in there that you can expand and actually physically twist and pull the pistons out. It's rare that a good heavy dose of compressed air won't shift it, but it does happen occasionally. So once this is all out, the next step is quite literally to give it a liberal caking of WD-40, which does act as an excellent degreaser, and making sure that plenty flows through the bleed nipple hole there. This is why we took the bleed nipple out. So we're literally just caking the whole lot in WD. Leave that in there to soak for a little while, and oops, making sure to take your rubber parts out first before you do that, unlike I've just done just there, but that brief exposure will be okay. So we do that, give it all a good soak in, leave it for a little while, and then once it's been there a little while, take your toothbrush and then just have at it and give it a really, really good scrub. Once it's had a really good scrub, you'll see the dirt that comes off it. You'll be absolutely astounded. I mean, you can kind of see a little already just there, the colour of the dirt that's coming off that, and that's literally just been there a few seconds. So once it's sat and had a good soak, you can use other types of degreaser, sort of Geyser or Gunko, that kind of thing if you have some, but WD-40 as an initial degrease works really, really well, and it's really cheap if you buy the big jugs of it, so why not go ahead and use that to get the worst of it off. If you've got any really thick, caked on greasy, oily deposits, what you can do is, taking a screwdriver, is carefully sort of scrape them off to allow your WD-40 to soak in. So you can see there's a little bit there, not too much on this one, but you sometimes get a build up in little recesses and things, so you can give them a bit of a scraping with a screwdriver or something similar. General rule of thumb is, when you're scraping anything, if you're scraping a surface like the inside of here that's crucial for fitment and sealing and the like, don't use an object that's as hard or harder than the surface that you're scraping. So for this you would use a softer metal or wood or plastic or something like that to dig in and have a good scrape of any gunk in there, but you shouldn't have much inside there, for example, anyway. So that's really all there is to it. As soon as I get some brake fluid, I will show the reassembly procedure. Once this is all scrubbed down and wiped over and everything, you can use another degreaser. You can give it a wipe with thinners. If you want to paint it, you'll really have to go to town and make sure it's spotless and thoroughly degrease it, rinse it off, wipe it down with thinners and allow it to dry completely before you go ahead and paint it. You'll need high temp primer and paint, because any kind of grease or crud that's still left on there, you'll just be wasting your time. You'll ruin your paint that's going on there. Just for a clean up, you don't have to be too thorough, as long as the internal bits are spotless. That's the important thing, and as long as you know they're spotless when it all goes back together. And then when it all goes back together, you will need some silicone grease and a few other bits and pieces, and hopefully once my brake fluid turns up, I will throw together a reassembly procedure, which again will apply to brake calipers in general. So I hope this has been useful. Sorry if it's been a bit long-winded, but hopefully this has been useful to you, and thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye now.